The Sam Sorbo Show is brought to you in partnership by the Herzog Foundation.
Hi there. On today's show, we're digging into the controversy regarding the nation's blood supplies. This is an urgent matter that we ought to be dealing with. For instance, what if the transfusion you receive carries more risk than you realize? And why are families, and especially maybe homeschoolers, a little bit more aware of this and more open to the truth, or more equipped, say, to recognize the truth? So from science to firsthand stories, this is a conversation everyone should hear. This is the Sam Sorbo Show. Here we go.
Sam Sorbo,
Sam, welcome back to the program.
I'm glad we welcome Sam Sorbo.
It's great to have you here.
All right, welcome back to the Sam Sorbo Show. Today, we're digging into a critical conversation about blood safety and medical freedom. My guest is the Vice President and Director of Media Relations for Safe Blood Donation, where he serves as the U.S. representative. Safe Blood's mission is to protect health, life through public education about the blood supply and also the mRNA vaccines. Also, to connect transfusion recipients with non-mRNA vaccinated donors, and also to help restore true health freedom. Dr. Clinton Ohlers holds a PhD from UPenn and has become a trusted voice in medical science journalism and also vaccine safety. So we'll start the conversation right there. First of all, welcome, Dr. Clinton Ohlers.
Great. Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Define vaccine safety for me.
Wow. Well, that's a really loaded question because even since the time that I wrote that bio, right, and updated it, vaccine safety has become more and more of a questionable thing. So, even Peter McCullough has called for a halt on all of the childhood vaccines due to lack of safety testing. So it may actually be an oxymoron or misnomer at this point. We don't know, in my opinion, what the safety level of vaccines are, but we do know that many are very dangerous. And of course, the most dangerous is the COVID-19 mRNA vaccines.
Well, let me ask you this. Is it a vaccine?
Well, there we go. Another misnomer, right? It's a...
We're just going to blow. I'm just tossing bombs everywhere.
My favorite film is the 2000 version of The Importance of Being Earnest. And there's a line in there that says, "Isn't language a curious thing?" And this is one of those cases where something that wasn't a vaccine is now a vaccine, right? Something that was really a genetic therapy has now been labeled as a vaccine because of the intent of the genetic therapy's purpose to simulate something similar to a vaccine. But even then, a typical vaccine shows your body the virus that it's trying to protect against, and then it tricks it by thinking that virus is dangerous by loading a toxin in there. And that's why we had thimerosal back in vaccines, the mercury additive. And that's why we have aluminum in there now. You have to inject a toxin in with a killed virus in order to trick the body, because otherwise the body just goes, man, that's a dead virus. I don't care about dead viruses, right? So you put the dead virus in, it's like, somebody taps you on the shoulder at the same time somebody else hits you, and you think the person that tapped you on the shoulder is the culprit. So that's how you trick the body with vaccines. But the mRNA vaccine does something quite differently. It just says, hey, here's something about the virus, the spike protein, and we're going to teach the body about the spike protein by making the body create spike protein so the body can then fight itself, right? So that's something very different.
So, okay, we're going to have to start back at the beginning, because I am now revising my definition of vaccine. My original definition of vaccine was you were given basically a weaker strain of a virus or an inert version of the virus, and the body would then fight the virus by developing some kind of antibody against that virus. And then those antibodies would work against the newer, the stronger, the real version of the virus. But what you're saying to me is it was always just an inert virus, and the body was tricked into defending against it by this other additive.
Yes, and that's what additive is exactly it, an adjuvant, right? We hear about adjuvants in the vaccines. That's what it is. It's an additive. And now I'm getting this directly from, our now Director of Health and Human Services, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. In his interview with Joe Rogan, he explained this in detail that the vaccine, what makes the vaccine potent and able to create antibodies at such a level that it could even be receive authorization as a approved drug, is the toxin that's added to it. So as Kennedy pointed out, he said among virologists there's this slogan called the greater the toxicity of the adjuvant, the greater the immune response.
Right.
Okay. So for mothers who have been concerned, and for everyone who was told that these things were safe and effective, as Kennedy pointed out, toxicologists tend to have difficult relationships with virologists, or excuse me, immunologists, because the toxicologists are asking, if you inject the child with aluminum, that's a toxin. Where's that aluminum going? Now, there was a deceptive part of this too, which is why, like you're saying, wow, you're changing my definition of what a vaccine is, because we were deceptively led to believe that we were not injecting the body with toxins. We were told that thimerosal, which is mercury, which is the second most toxic substance on Earth after radiation.
I'm sorry.
Right?
Since I was a child,
Yes.
I knew that mercury was very dangerous. You do not
Yes.
play with thermometers.
Exactly.
You don't touch mercury because the body absorbs it and it's toxic. All of that. You don't drink it. It's very, very toxic, like all that. So you're telling me that every time I injected or had my child injected, I was actually giving them a toxin.
Yes.
That was safe and effective.
Yeah. And we were told that thimerosal, if you recall. Now, I mean, I remember when this was the actual narrative, and this is what I heard.
So they renamed mercury to make it sound better.
Yeah, it's thimerosal. They call it thimerosal, and they said it was a preservative.
Right.
So this was a complete deception.
They even mislabeled it on purpose.
Well, yeah, mislabeled it. I mean, that's a pretty big euphemism. You're very kind. I mean, they directly lied.
What's a preservative? Like we've never used mercury as a preservative, so why would they call it a preservative?
I mean, you put mercury in your beef jerky, or in your use it like to salt or smoke fish or something. You don't, right? And that's what I wondered. I thought, geez, it's a preservative. How does that work? And this was only going back now, like 10 or 11 years that I recall hearing that. And it was a head scratcher, but you trust the system, right? And we'll get into this. The biggest killer in the past few years has been misplaced trust. But you trust the system, you trust the CDC, you trust the people that are saying this. And especially as me, as an academic, right? You learn that outside your field, you give the benefit of the doubt. You're saying, look, if they're saying it's a preservative, there must be something that I, as a PhD in history of science, don't know about the manufacture of vaccines. That
Trust
if I
the
did
expert.
know, yes, if I did know, then it would make sense that mercury's a preservative. But that's what they're banking on. So they lie to you.
But the polio vaccine. The polio vaccine contained thimerosal/mercury?
I don't know the exact contents of that one, but I do know that on the basis of this, it must have, now there's live viruses and killed virus vaccines. Right. And so I'm not an expert in all of the differences, but I do know that, the polio vaccine, I have a colleague, John Davidson, who I worked with on the film Epidemic of Fraud, and his older brother died of brain cancer as a child after receiving the polio vaccine. And that was one of the big problems with the polio vaccines, were deaths by things like brain cancer. And now in that case, I think that was linked to the, simian virus SV, I just forgot it, but the SV40, yes, the SV40 that was in there, because that suppressed cancer fighting genes. And so we had and then of course that was the big shock, was to find SV40 in the COVID-19 vaccines. It's like, well, why were they in the COVID-19 vaccines after we had already had this terrible experience with polio?
It's astonishing, because we learn things in school.
Yes.
As you know, for me, everything goes back to school and education and the difference therein, right? We learn all these things in school. So I understood that during the smallpox epidemic of the revolution, George Washington had his troops inoculated with smallpox, actual smallpox. In other words, by infecting a healthy patient with smallpox, you might lose, and I think the numbers were astonishing, but you might lose a third of them, but the other 2/3 would be preserved against smallpox in the future. And smallpox took 50% or more of the people that it infected. So by the time somebody succumbed to the infection, they had less of a chance of surviving than if you actually purposely infected them as a healthy person. But that was really smallpox. Now we're going into these vaccines, and and by the way, they did change the definition of the word vaccine in order to include the mRNA in it. So where it used to have those words of inert virus or because viruses don't die, but a dead virus, the form of the virus, the mRNA has no virus in it. So it should not by any stretch be called a vaccine. And yet they changed the definition of the word vaccine, which bugs me to no end because that's cheating. It's cheating. It's cheating. You don't change the definition. It's literally, it's cheating. Like in a game of chess, and you say, well, I'm going to, knight my king or whatever. You can't do that because that's changing the definitions, and it doesn't happen.
Well, let me give you two scenarios. So in scenario one, I say, I'm going to give you a vaccine. It's just going to go into the muscle tissue. And in the muscle tissue, it's just going to inform your body of what COVID-19 is like. And then that very material that I've injected into your muscle tissue in the shoulder is going to disappear within a matter of days. On a level of 1 to 10, what would you say is your level of concern about taking that vaccine?
Well, first, I'm concerned because I know you're lying through your teeth.
Right. Okay.
I know too much.
Right. But back in 2020, right? 2021, excuse me, we didn't know that. We didn't know these were complete lies. The real truth, if I translate that into facts, I would say, well, we're going to put an experimental gene therapy that is not within the duration of its safety testing into your body, and it is going to contain mRNA that will be distributed throughout your body. We don't know how long that mRNA will persist, but we've actually encapsulated it with technology that's designed to make it to go throughout your body, even across the blood-brain barrier, and to persist for an unknown number of weeks.
And we don't know what it's going to do while it's there.
And we don't know what the shut-off mechanism is, and we don't know how long it takes.
Well, here's
would you take that? Right? See, nobody would have done that. They had to lie outright.
Actually, they didn't lie. This is what's scary, Clinton.
Okay.
I mean, forgive me, but this is really what is the scariest part, is it was always experimental.
Mm-hmm.
And then they stopped the experiment. It was always experimental. When they issued it the first day, it was experimental. And then after, I think it was like only 4 months, they decided they would stop the experiment. They didn't get enough data. They didn't conclude the experiment. They just said, it's unfair to the people who are in the test group, the not test group, what is it called? The other group that doesn't get the shot, right? That it was unfair to them to not give them the test shot.
Right. But I even consider that a lie.
The control group.
Right, because the lie is that this thing is so good, it would be unethical for us to deny the control group. And we therefore erase the control group so that we never know what the long-term effects are, because we certainly know there will be negative long-term effects. If those come out, because we have an existing control group, we're going to be shut down.
And that's why I just would never. That's shenanigans. But unfortunately, and I know exactly why, actually. I wish I didn't understand why, but I understand all too well why. People just went along with it. Mm-hmm. And part of the reason that they got themselves injected is because everyone else was doing it. It was literally the case of, well, if everyone else was jumping off the bridge, would you? Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Well, I remember, my parents, like my dad asked me about it. And I remember at the beginning of this, I was concerned about, say, effects on fertility, because we're hearing that it could possibly be analogous to a protein in the placenta that's needed to bring a infant to full term in the womb. And, I talked with my dad about it, and his doctor wanted him to take the vaccine. And, at that time I thought, well, from what you're saying, it sounds like the risks outweigh the benefits outweigh the risks for someone of your age. Now we know so much more. But remember, at that time, people were already sounding the alarm. Del Bigtree was sounding the alarm. And like even my wife, played for me Bigtree's analysis of this. And to be honest, I didn't believe it. I thought, this must be one of the people on our own side going a little too far, because he's claiming things like that there were more deaths in the control group than in the actual than among the there were more deaths in the vaccinated group than the unvaccinated group. And I just said, I said, this sounds far-fetched. At some point our good guys are going to be wrong about something, right? So Bigtree must be wrong. And this is what I think is you're getting at. It wasn't just so much everyone's jumping off the bridge, I'm going to jump off too. I think it was our systems of trust that were in place. And, academics are very used to people giving them far-fetched ideas in areas where they're specialized, and no, that's just far-fetched. And so you kind of get used to kind of saying, well, that sounds a little far-fetched to me. But that's just another way of saying, I'm not that interested. It's not engaging me, and I'm not going to spend time on it. Right? Far-fetched is not a quantitative measure of anything. It's just telling how you feel in language that's very acceptable and makes you look smart at cocktail parties. Okay. The only thing that matters is the actual evidence. And Del Bigtree had this evidence way out in front. Right? And I should have been listening to it, but I wasn't. Professor Sukrit Bhakti, I didn't know about him at the time, but he's one of the people that really informed Safe Blood in its formation. He warned about the cancers before this ever rolled out. He said there will be a dramatic increase in cancers. Why?
Yeah.
Because of how the mRNA works in the system, how it affects the lymph nodes. Right?
McCullough also, I remember interviewing him early on, and he predicted massive waves of death, which haven't really come to fruition, but I'm hearing more and more about these rapid onset cancers, these turbo cancers. Like maybe, he was off by a couple years, but I'm, waiting hesitantly, looking to the future, because it's kind of scary now that we can put a lot of this in hindsight and understand all the different captures that have happened in our systems. And as you put it so eloquently, systems of trust, right? So we entered, and by the way, we entered the system of trust without even knowing that we were just being just brought into it. Mm-hmm. So we were brought up. This is your doctor. You trust your doctor because your doctor knows he's an expert. We trust experts. We were just brought into it. And I heard somebody say the other day, you can't see the bars of the cage because you were born inside the cage and then you were taught to love the bars. And so you can't see them. And that's the way I talk about school now. And in fact, I like that systems of trust, because it's sort of like, well, the trust is there, so why would you question it? It's far-fetched.
Yeah. And plausibility. We make a lot of decisions based on what we think is plausible. But plausibility has a lot to do just with what the size of our box is. People talk about Occam's razor a lot, right? You hear that the simplest solution is probably the right one, right? Well, that's mistaken too. That's not what Occam actually taught. It's the simplest solution that's sufficient to all of the evidence is probably the right one. And so
that's a good distinction.
The evidence may have to severely enlarge your box of what you consider plausible. Right. And that's what the whole term conspiracy theorist was designed to do. It was designed to label someone so that you could say, oh, what they're saying is implausible. It's far-fetched. Right.
Right.
And get people looking at the label and being fearful of being labeled with that label instead of looking at the actual evidence. The only thing that really matters is the evidence and the reasoning that evidence points you towards.
Okay, so we have yet to talk about why you're here,
Mm-hmm.
which is to discuss safe blood, but this has been a very enlightening conversation. We're going to take a quick break. And when I come back, I'm going to talk to Dr. Clinton Ohlers about safe blood. What does the company do and why are they here and why it's important to use? So stay tuned. This is the Sam Sorbo Show. We'll be right back. Thanks for tuning into the Sam Sorbo Show. You know, we are in a battle for our very nation, a nation that was founded on Christian principles and on the Bible. The 10 Commandments is the basis for our rule of law. But these days, when you go talk to people on the street, you'll find that most of them don't even know what rule of law means. And that's why I'm so proud to have Herzog Foundation as a sponsor of my show. I also love what they do because they seek for the benefit of Christian education throughout the nation. So Herzog Foundation is a wonderful partner for us here at the Sam Sorbo Show. Thanks for watching. Born from an unwavering passion for health, truth, and freedom, Rebel Lion teamed up with the world's leading medicinal chemists to form Fierce Immunity. This groundbreaking formula isn't just an immune booster. It's a declaration of independence to your health. Fierce Immunity is GMP certified, made in the USA, non-GMO, gluten-free, and third-party tested, backed by the Rebel Lion commitment to community, health, and truth. Strengthen your defenses, supercharge your energy, and embrace your inner lion. Visit Get Fierce now and use code SAM to get 15% off your order, because real freedom begins with fierce health. And welcome back to the Sam Sorbo Show. My guest is Clinton Ohlers. He is a doctor of, what did you say, history?
Yeah, PhDs in history, focused on history of science.
Focused on the history of science, which is really clever. And most people don't pay very much attention to the history of science, but that makes you an expert in this field. And you have taken a position with Safe Blood. So tell me what Safe Blood is and why we should be interested in it.
Well, what we do at Safe Blood is we match people who are going to have blood transfusions, right, with donors who are not mRNA vaccinated. Okay.
What if the person himself is mRNA vaccinated? Does it matter?
It doesn't matter what the recipient is. Like, you may be a person who has not been exposed to the vaccine, right? Or you may have been exposed to the vaccine and not want further exposure. So what we're really doing is protecting life and health by matching donors with recipients. What we're also doing is fighting to make the blood supply safer overall. Because what we can do at Safe Blood, right? If you become a member at Safe Blood, or you contact us when you need blood, you know, or you could become a lifetime member, you know, we have different, you know, prices for these things, and we then match you, right? The best thing is to be like a monthly member, but that helps us because we're not just matching people with blood. We're also doing other things to get the blood supply safer, because what matching can do, it's the most efficient and right now the safest way to say, if you're going into a scheduled surgery, to line you up with somebody who can give you blood that's not going to have mRNA vaccine particles contaminating it, or the product of that, which is the spike protein, which for at least a period of time after vaccination, and sadly, in some cases, even 2 years or more after vaccination, a vaccinated person will have a much higher level, typically even 10 times higher level of spike protein in circulation than they would have if they had just gotten the COVID-19 person to person, right?
So
and for a much longer time.
So basically, Safe Blood is serving people who weren't vaccinated.
For the most part, because the most people who are interested in it are people who
never got the vaccine.
Although
there's a growing number of vaccinated people who are like, wait a minute, sign me up for that.
And there's a number of people who had the vaccine and realized that they had injury. You know, I saw an interview with Nicole Shanahan recently, and she was talking about how she had a miscarriage and she lost a lot of blood, almost her entire blood supply. And so she had to receive then, you know, an enormous amount of blood, which means, of course, she's guaranteed to get blood from mRNA vaccinated donors. Now, she had already had the vaccine. So subsequent to that, she had clotting issues. Oh. Now, she assumes it was from taking the vaccine originally. It may have been, perhaps she didn't react to the first dose and then she did to the blood. But the point is she should never have been put in a situation in the first place where her only choice was to receive blood from vaccinated donors. And that's because she was in an emergency situation. So this is what I'm really trying to bring to people's awareness right now is we have a real window of opportunity here with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as head of the HHS, with this whole political climate that's changed, with the sort of lifting of cancellation that we're experiencing, because we do not have a blood supply that is safe for emergency use. Okay.
Red Cross doesn't do any of this, right?
No. We need national policies. A lot of states, about 11 states now are working them on the state level, right? And it'd be great for your audience to be aware of this, that you want your state to guarantee certain things. You want to be guaranteed the right of knowing where the source of your blood is. The source of your blood from an mRNA vaccinated donor or not. You want the right to direct. So that means in an emergency, then I can say to the hospital, let's say I'm in an emergency, or, somebody else that I'm their advocate for, maybe a family member's been in an emergency. You can say, hey, wait, you're going to give them a transfusion. I want to know the sources of that blood. Is this from an mRNA vaccinated donor? And then that way you can say, well, find other units of blood and give them to my loved one because I don't want that exposure. Okay.
So you're not a blood bank?
No, we match donors and recipients.
So you're an advocacy group.
In a way, yeah, because look, blood only has a limited shelf life, right? And there's enormous bureaucratic hurdles and infrastructure hurdles to go through if you wanted to actually start a whole new blood banking company.
Even know. I'm sorry. I don't even know how you would go about, my friend's in a car accident. So I go to the hospital and I say, hey, I know he would only want non-mRNA blood. How can you guarantee that to me? Right now, they can't, is what you're saying.
Right now, the only thing that would guarantee you is hostility from probably most of the medical staff. Yeah. Right.
And so Safe Blood is really trying to make it a less hostile environment.
Yeah. Tomorrow's going to be a big day, right? Because there's going to be congressional hearings now about these major studies that have come out on tens of millions, comparing tens of millions of people there were two major studies of vaccinated versus non-mRNA vaccinated. And I think that we're going to see the narrative really change, right? Because those studies found, for example, that there was a 500% increase in myocarditis among the vaccinated worldwide than the unvaccinated. I have a friend I just spoke to, a few weeks ago. He's actually one of the new pastors at my church. Back in December, he had transverse myelitis. He thought he was going to be paralyzed. He was worried he'd be paralyzed for life. Transverse myelitis is an inflammation of the spinal cord. Okay.
Right.
There was a 300% increase in transverse myelitis among the vaccinated based on this global study. Wow. Now, let me explain, for the audience, what it means when you have a 500 or a 300% increase in something. It now means that the thing causing that is the leading cause. Do you see? 1-to-1 would be now 50% of, say, transverse myelitis or myocarditis is being caused by the vaccine, and 50% was whatever previously caused these things. Now, once 5 people have myocarditis after getting the vaccine versus 1 before, right?
Right.
Now, the vast majority, do you understand that? The vast majority of myocarditis in our country and globally, and it's even higher among men, right? Because among young men, it's a 620% increase.
Right.
Okay. That means anybody who has myocarditis or transverse myelitis probably got it from the vaccine.
Right.
Even if you don't know if they're vaccinated, right?
It's 4 out of 5.
The odds are if they've got myocarditis or they got transverse myelitis, they were vaccinated.
Right.
Do you see? So if you could eliminate the leading cause of myocarditis and the leading cause of and then if you look at
not vaccinating people.
Exactly. Well, look at all of the list of things.
Yeah.
Over 100% increase in cancers. Okay. If we look at the UK insurance data that came out in 2022, all right, there was a 522% increase. And this is in the whole country, not just among the vaccinated, but among the whole country. 522% increase in insurance claims for blood disorders. Okay. So if you could reduce cancer by over half, reduce blood disorders by 80%, reduce the leading cause of myocarditis, the leading cause of transverse myelitis. I mean, basically, when you look at the list of things that have increased 100% with the onset of this vaccine, it's like everything, even psychological disorders.
So
Okay.
basically, just so that people understand, if something
Yeah.
increases 100%, you're doubling its
Yes.
position.
You're doubling
And
its
so
position.
basically, when you double its position, whatever is the new factor that is the cause of that is the leading factor, is the leading cause at that point. Because
Exactly.
all
Above
other causes
100%.
added up to 50%. This one is 50%. It's the leading cause.
Yes.
And you're saying that we're talking about things that have more than doubled, that have quadrupled, quintupled, sextupled
Yes.
from the vaccine. So
Yeah.
the vaccine, so that would mean that the vaccine is the leading cause of, in a sense, health issues.
This is what I want people to realize, because it's not being talked about that way. Okay. There are people who are talking about 500% increases and stuff, and I don't think people realize what this means.
That's right. We have
It
to
means
sort
that
of
this is the
translate it.
leading cause.
Right.
This is the leading cause of all of these maladies.
And it's fully preventable.
And it's fully preventable. So like really
Fully
easily
preventable.
preventable. You know, it's
But
not like,
if
I don't
you're
have to take.
if you're transfusing
Yeah.
blood into healthy people
Yes.
because of some trauma,
Right.
and giving them myocarditis at the same time might not be the best plan.
Right. Like I'm actually at work right now with Dr. James Thorpe of the Advanced Biological Research Group, him and some others. And we're looking at these cases. We have several cases now. A couple of them are in infants. You know, most famously, this baby Alex, who died from a blood clot that ran from the knee to the heart after receiving a blood transfusion. Right. And this was particularly tragic because the parents were trying to avoid this and had lined up blood, but they did preliminary surgery. But this was also a very important case because where was the injection site for the transfusion? It was at the knee. So literally where the blood went into this baby's body, a clot immediately started to form, was unresponsive to any thinners or any treatment, and killed this baby very quickly. Another infant that I just saw a post of from the father, in fact, this first came across my desk just a couple weeks ago on Twitter. This baby, the mother died in childbirth. They gave the baby a transfusion. Okay. After on day 2 of its life, this baby died from myocarditis. So now let's get back to percentages. If we get back to percentages, how many cases of myocarditis in infants and 2-year-olds and children were there before this vaccine? Basically zero. Like it was unheard of. Even pediatric cardiologists.
Well, look, we're seeing it with children, right? We're
Yeah,
seeing myocarditis in children, and we're already remarking. We're not hearing about the babies per se,
Yeah.
but in children, certainly, we've already remarked that that's weird because we never heard about myocarditis in kids, and now we're having young athletes collapsing on the field.
Well, look at that stat, right? Athletes collapsing on the field used to be about 12 per year, right? Now it's like somewhere between at least 12 per month, right? So that's a 1,200% increase, right? Look at natal death. You know, I was looking at, Dr. Daniel Nagase out of Canada very early on reported of the increase in natal deaths that they saw. It went from something like 3 to 6 in a year to 80 something in a year. And Dr. Thorpe pointed out to me, well, that's just in his unit. And that's not miscarriages. Mm-hmm. So let's set aside all the miscarriages that happened because of this vaccine and just look on stillborns. That is babies that were viable and should have been born. When you go from 2 to 3 to 80, like, I did the math on the exact months and all that, but it was a 1,400% increase.
Right.
Now consider that for pregnant mothers, right? When my wife was pregnant, how careful was she to not eat cantaloupe or cold cuts because of possible listeria, right? Mothers are terribly protective of their unborn children. Would you do anything that might increase in a 1,400% increase, 1,400 in stillbirths? Now, I'm not saying that's the official number. I'm just saying when I looked at different hospitals reporting on this and did the math, that was about it. Or would you give your kids something that would make them 20 to 40 times likelier to die on a soccer field playing soccer or to die in their sleep?
It's,
when they have that nightly adrenaline surge.
Yeah, it's an outrage.
Yeah. And so you don't want this transferred to you through the blood. Yeah. So getting back to the blood, this is what we're trying to avoid. You don't want it transferred to the blood. So what can you do? If you're having a surgery scheduled and you don't know of anyone who can, donate for you, right? Because this isn't a brand new thing. It's called directed donation. People have often gotten people to direct blood for them, but you want to get matched with a non-mRNA donor. Okay, if you are a woman who's going into deliver, James Thorpe, he's an obstetrician. His advice, so this is where I get that from, is to donate to yourself. It's called autologous donation. There's nothing safer than donating to yourself, right? And you can store at least a unit of blood. You're not a unit of blood, right, ahead of time in case you need it. That's one way to limit the risks, because that's an emergency that might happen, hopefully won't, but at least, you can't really plan your emergencies too well, but at least with childbirth, there's, a possibility of complications you can prepare for. And then
a unit of blood, a single unit, you can't do more than one unit. How long does it take to donate a unit?
Two. Yeah. But it's not going to, it wouldn't have helped, say, somebody like Nicole Shanahan, because she lost like 4 liters.
Right.
So
1 unit of blood, that's a single sitting donation.
Yeah.
You would call the hospital in advance and say, I'd like to donate blood to myself.
Yeah, you can set it up ahead of time, and the Red Cross allows that. And because the lifespan of blood on the shelf is about 40 days. So I don't know if a person can really give more than one. But you can at least donate to yourself ahead of time, and that could be, a real critical value. But the thing I tell people is I drive very carefully, right? I'm like a grandma behind the wheel now, because I know that in an emergency, I have to take what's off the shelf, right? My family has to take what's off the shelf. So we have to change that in this country. People should not be in that position. Okay. And we shouldn't be in a place where hospitals in different states, for example, the Northwest part of this country is very bad for hospitals. Like if you're in Washington State, forget it. If you think you're going to get a directed donation, you've got to go out of state. So we've got members in different states who are having to travel to other states halfway across the country, Washington to Pennsylvania, now Minnesota. The blood banks in Minnesota have tightened up on this because they are so supportive of the narrative that this vaccine is safe and effective. And they've become resistant now to directed donations. And so I know of a person right now who needs a bone marrow transplant. She's getting 2 weeks to travel. She may need to have her blood levels topped off. And before, she traveled to Florida to get a transfusion, but now she's afraid she's going to have to stay in Minnesota because people shouldn't be facing these kinds of terrible decisions just because a hospital wants to make an ideological policy that's against the best interest of the health of the patient. And so this is why we need legislation at the state levels to protect the right to directed donations, to protect the right to autologous donations, and to start making things happen where the blood banks have to track mRNA versus non-mRNA vaccinated blood.
It's a good point. I will say that I know that I've seen some sort of directive where I believe it's Trump is now saying that they can't mandate vaccines at all, something to that extent, which is excellent. So hopefully there's movement in that direction. I want to ask you the 3 questions that I ask every guest before we end our time together. What is your educational background? We know you are a PhD in history of science. The question is, how do you use it in your current career?
Well, that's right. I use it all the time because I was asked to join Safe Blood because I was specially equipped to examine the science, right, and be able to communicate it, and also be able to sort through, good science from bogus science. So I use that all the time.
What advice would you give your younger self?
Well, there's 2 versions of my younger self. There's my atheist younger self, and then there's my younger self after I became a believing Christian. So, the advice to my previous younger self would be obvious. I think you should really consider spiritual things and put your faith in Christ. But since then, I think my biggest advice would be not to worry. And maybe my second biggest advice would be not to be too trusting to trusted networks, because that's been the big lesson for me. I mean, I can say at least I was early to the party on everything that went wrong in COVID and the vaccine rollout, but I wasn't as early as I could have been if I had just been a little less trusting. And so you've got to follow the data and not necessarily who you trust, but you have to find people who you can trust, who are reliable, but you only come across them by being really rigorous about the information.
Yes. And being open. All right. So finally, what's the most urgent cultural shift that you see needed in our society today?
Well, the most urgent cultural shift, in my opinion, is we need to get back to faith in Christ. Okay, the reason that we're experiencing so much corruption and all of these problems, it's like out of the book of Hosea. You know, you turn away from God, and lawsuits spring up like poisonous weeds in a plowed field. All of these things, institutional capture, corruption, the fact that you've got companies that are happy to be free of any sort of accountability or liability for their product in order to make millions of dollars, making people sick knowing they would. I mean, that was the terrible stuff about the information that came out about Pfizer and these other companies. They had the data. They had the data and they knew it was going to be damaging. But there's no, do you see that kind of level of just prosaic evil is emerging because people have not experienced the regeneration through the Holy Spirit. And, you know, it doesn't sound like inclusive to say that, or, you know, diverse enough, or all of these sort of shibboleths that we idolize in this society. But that's the only thing that's going to make the lasting change that matters, that's going to be important to the whole culture and to the individual, you know, because you've got a life really beyond death that you've got to think about.
People have to put their eternal souls above the almighty dollar. Clinton Ohlers, thank you so much for coming on the program.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Great to talk to you. All right, so that's it for me. Thanks so much for joining me. We'll see you next time on the Sam Sorbo Show. Remember, speak truth and speak it boldly. Bye.
The views and opinions expressed in the Sam Sorbo Show are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views and positions of the Herzog Foundation.